We're pocketing your $110,000 performance bonus, Mercer, and your legacy services are no longer required. Lance sneered, sliding my termination papers across the glass conference table. Little did he know, the 110,000 lines of proprietary CNC toolpath code running his $45 million plant were licensed solely to me and expired the second my paycheck bounced. 3 days before, that cold Friday afternoon in the third-floor executive suite, the industrial floor of Thornton Precision Manufacturing was humming with the steady, high-frequency whine of $18 million worth of automated machinery. For 22 years, that sound had been the heartbeat of my professional life. I was 52 years old, and I had built this factory's technical capabilities from the ground up alongside its original founder, Walter Thornton. When Walter and I started the company back in 2004, we operated out of a drafty, 100-year-old brick warehouse with 3 reconditioned manual lathes and a prayer. By the time Walter retired at 66, Thornton Precision had expanded into a massive 120,000 square foot automated industrial facility, holding a $45 million Tier 1 defense and aerospace manufacturing contract. We produced ultra-high tolerance titanium fuel injection manifolds and aerospace turbine housings. In our industry, there is zero room for error. The tolerances we maintained were measured in micro-inches, specifically 0.0002 inches, less than 1/10 the width of a human hair. Standard off-the-shelf industrial computer numerical control machines cannot achieve those tolerances on hardened titanium alloys at commercial speed. They chatter, heat up, expand, and ruin $30,000 raw forging blocks within seconds. The secret weapon behind Thornton Manufacturing's ability to crush every global competitor was a custom software suite and proprietary hardware macro setup I had personally spent 12 years developing. Over a decade of painstaking engineering, I wrote more than 110,000 lines of specialized 5-axis G-code algorithms, dynamic heat compensation routines, and real-time spindle load adjustments. This master software suite, which we internally designated as the Mercer 5X Toolpath Engine, sat on a dedicated machine control server linked via fiber optic cable to every single robotic milling cell on the plant floor. Without my code, those $18 million machines were nothing more than multi-ton paperweights, unable to cut anything more precise than a wooden fence post. Crucially, I did not sell this code to Thornton Manufacturing. Back in 2012, during a severe corporate liquidity crunch following an aggressive plant expansion, Walter Thornton could not afford to pay my full salary or fund the expensive international patent filings for the multi-axis algorithms. Instead of letting the company collapse, we struck a formal legal intellectual property agreement drafted by top IP attorneys. I retained absolute personal ownership of all design patents, microcode routines, and software engines under my independent corporate entity, Mercer IP Technologies, LLC. Under Section 12B of our Master Technology Licensing Agreement, Mercer IP Technologies granted Thornton Precision Manufacturing a revocable, non-exclusive manufacturing license to use the 110,000 lines of toolpath code. The licensing fee was structured as a nominal annual payment, coupled with a mandatory contractually guaranteed annual performance bonus of $110,000 payable on the last business day of July. Furthermore, Section 12B contained an ironclad, self-executing default clause if Thornton Manufacturing ever terminated my employment without cause, or failed to disburse the full $110,000 bonus within 24 hours of notice, the commercial license automatically self-terminated. Upon license termination, all hardware encryption keys would immediately invalidate, and Thornton Manufacturing would be legally prohibited from executing a single line of my proprietary code. For 14 years, Walter honored every word of that contract. He treated me as a true technical partner, paid my annual bonus like clockwork, and respected the boundaries of our agreement. But when Walter stepped down from active management, his 34-year-old son, Lance Thornton, took the reins as Executive Vice President of Corporate Operations. Lance held a fresh MBA from a prestigious business school and possessed an insatiable desire to prove his corporate brilliance to the board of directors. He saw the world entirely through simplified balance sheets, labor cost ratios, and quarterly EBITDA margins. To Lance, manufacturing was not about physics, metallurgy, or high-precision engineering. It was simply an assembly line of interchangeable widgets managed by overpaid legacy workers. He drove a pristine lease-option luxury sports car, wore tailored three-piece suits to an industrial shop floor, and openly sneered at the veteran engineers who had spent decades keeping the business afloat. Within 6 months of taking over daily operations, Lance launched what he called his profit optimization initiative. He slashed our preventative maintenance schedules, replaced high-grade tungsten carbide cutting inserts with cheap, uncertified imported alternatives, and began eyeing the payroll budget for drastic cuts. One rainy Tuesday morning in late July, 3 days before my annual performance bonus was due, our veteran shop fabrication manager, Carl Vance, walked into my glass-walled engineering booth. Carl was 50 years old, had grease under his fingernails, and knew every bolt in the plant. He looked deeply troubled as he tossed a printed internal corporate memorandum onto my desk. "You need to look at this, Harlan," Carl said, his voice quiet with suppressed anger. "Lance just submitted his revised third-quarter operating budget to the board. He's taking credit for a 40% reduction in engineering overhead. He listed your position as legacy systems redundancy and marked your department for immediate liquidation." I picked up the document and scanned the financial tables. Lance had mapped out a complete restructuring plan. By eliminating senior engineering salaries and refusing to pay out accrued contract performance bonuses, he planned to pad the company's net profits for the quarter, a move that would trigger a massive six-figure executive performance bonus for himself under his new leadership contract. Does he honestly believe the automated lines can run without senior technical oversight? I asked, looking up at Carl. Carl let out a bitter laugh. "Lance thinks the machines run themselves, Harlan. He told the floor supervisors yesterday that any high school kid with a laptop can press the green start button on a 5-axis machine. He has no idea that every time a cutter touches a $50,000 aerospace forging, your code is making 12,000 real-time calculations a second to prevent thermal warping." I looked down at the server console on my desk. The primary network node showed 18 active robotic cells operating at 98% efficiency, churning out precision components for our primary contract. I folded the memorandum neatly and placed it into my leather briefcase. "Let him try," I murmured calmly to Carl. "If Lance wants to test the structural integrity of his balance sheet against the reality of contract law, I won't stand in his way." By 3:30 p.m. on Friday afternoon, the summons arrived. Lance Thornton's corporate assistant sent an urgent calendar invite for a mandatory meeting in the third-floor executive conference room. When I walked into the glass-walled boardroom, Lance was sitting at the head of a mahogany table, swirling an expensive dark roast espresso in a porcelain cup. To his right sat Gary Hendersons, the newly hired human resources director, who had built a career helping corporate raiders trim headcount. On the table between them lay a thin manila folder containing my personnel file. "Take a seat, Harlan," Lance said, leaning back in his leather chair without looking up from his smartphone. I remained standing, keeping my hands resting comfortably in my jacket pockets. "I prefer to stand, Lance. What's on your mind?" Lance set his cup down with a sharp click and adjusted the cufflinks of his designer suit. "We're going to keep this brief and businesslike. Over the past 6 months, executive management has been conducting a comprehensive efficiency audit across all operational sectors. We've reviewed our engineering cost structures, and frankly, your compensation package is completely out of line with modern industry benchmarks." Gary from HR cleared his throat, opening the manila folder with practiced corporate formality. "As of 4 p.m. today, your position as Chief Tooling Design Engineer is being eliminated due to corporate restructuring and legacy role consolidation. We are offering you a standard separation package consisting of 2 weeks accrued vacation pay, contingent upon your signature on a general liability release and non-disclosure agreement." I looked at Lance. "My contract explicitly guarantees an annual performance bonus of $110,000 payable today based on our $45 million defense delivery milestones." Where is the check? Lance let out a condescending chuckle, shaking his head as if dealing with a confused child. That $110,000 bonus was discretionary, Harlan. In case you didn't notice, you failed to submit your monthly administrative KPI progress reports under my new operational framework. Furthermore, paying an individual engineer 110 grand on top of a base salary is an absurd relic of my father's outdated management style. That money is being reallocated to our quarterly capital reserve fund. It wasn't discretionary, Lance, I replied, keeping my voice entirely level and devoid of emotion. It is a legally binding obligation tied directly to the Mercer IP Technology Licensing Agreement, Section 12B. If that payment is not fully cleared within 24 hours of termination, Thornton Precision loses its operating license for the master toolpath algorithms. Lance exploded with laughter, throwing his arms over the back of his chair. Do you honestly think you can intimidate me with legal mumbo-jumbo, old man? We own this facility, we own the building, we own the $18 million worth of 5-axis machines, and we own every server sitting in the data closet. Our internal IT department completed a full server snapshot last night. We have all your CAD files, all your CAM post-processors, and every single G-code file you ever wrote saved directly onto our corporate cloud storage. He leaned forward across the glass table, his eyes narrowing with arrogant disdain. You're an overpaid legacy mechanic who got lucky under my father. You think you're irreplaceable? The world moved on, Harlan. Modern manufacturing is run by automated enterprise software and young talent who work for half your salary. You have 15 minutes to collect your personal belongings from your desk. Security will escort you off the premises. I watched him quietly for a moment. There was no anger in my heart, only a cold, crystalline clarity. Lance was so blinded by his own corporate hubris and desperate to claim his quarterly efficiency bonus that he had never bothered to read the underlying intellectual property filings or consult a specialized IP attorney. He believed that having a copy of a file on a hard drive was the same as holding the legal right and physical decryption keys to execute it. Let me confirm your position for the record, I said quietly. It is the official decision of Thornton Precision Manufacturing, represented by you as Executive Vice President, to terminate my employment effective immediately, refuse payment of my $110,000 performance bonus, and reject all contractual obligations under the Technology Licensing Agreement? Lance smirked, sliding a blue ballpoint pen toward me across the table. That is correct. Now sign the 2-week severance release so Gary can process your final check or walk out of here with $0. I picked up the pen, placed it neatly beside the severance document, and stepped back. I will decline the 2 weeks severance pay, Lance. I wish you the best of luck with Monday morning's production schedule. Before Lance could respond, Gary signaled 2 uniformed corporate security guards waiting in the hallway. They accompanied me down to the engineering department. The floor technicians watched in stunned silence as I packed my personal desktop items. A silver-framed photograph of my late wife, a couple of vintage drafting calipers, and a notebook containing my early mechanical sketches into my worn leather bag. Carl Vance walked over, his face pale with concern. Harlan, what happened? Lance decided to save $110,000 on his quarterly budget, I said quietly, shaking Carl's hand. Make sure you leave the plant floor on time today, Carl. Don't stay late on Sunday night. Carl stared at me, catching the subtle warning in my eyes. He nodded once, understanding far more than Lance ever could. At 4:15 p.m., security escorted me past the glass turnstiles and out into the afternoon heat of the parking lot. I walked to my Ford F-150 truck, unlocked the door, and placed my briefcase on the passenger seat. I opened my laptop, connected it to an encrypted cellular wireless hotspot, and logged directly into the administrative dashboard of Mercer IP Technologies LLC. A digital timer was running on my secure screen. The contractually mandated 24-hour cure window had commenced at precisely 4 p.m. If Thornton Precision Manufacturing failed to wire the full $110,000 performance bonus into Mercer IP's escrow account by 4 p.m. on Saturday, Section 12B would automatically trigger an irrevocable license revocation. Simultaneously, The remote hardware security module, embedded inside the plant's master server, would permanently revoke its digital cryptographic certificates at 12:01 a.m. on Monday morning. I closed my laptop, started the engine, and drove home to sit on my back porch with a cold glass of iced tea, waiting for the weekend to pass. Saturday afternoon at 4:00 p.m. arrived with quiet precision. I sat at my kitchen table, monitoring the secure escrow portal of Mercer IP Technologies. The 24-hour cure window specified under Section 12B had officially lapsed. Not a single cent of my $110,000 performance bonus had been transferred. Lance Thornton had made his gamble. In his arrogance, he assumed I was an aging employee making empty threats before quietly slinking off into retirement. He believed that corporate authority and physical ownership of a building trumped federal intellectual property law and digital cryptography. At 4:01 p.m., Mercer IP's automated legal compliance server generated an official notice of material default and instantaneous revocation of commercial technology license. The document was transmitted via certified electronic legal delivery directly to Lance Thornton's corporate email, the personal accounts of the Thornton Precision Board of Directors, and the firm's external legal counsel. Simultaneously, the digital licensing protocol executed its automated protocol. The Mercer 5X toolpath engine was not protected by a crude virus or destructive software bomb. That would have been illegal. Instead, it operated on a standard, highly sophisticated enterprise DRM architecture, the exact same hardware cryptographic security module, HSM, used by major global software corporations to protect proprietary industrial assets. Every 10 seconds, the central machine control server running our $18 million worth of custom 5-axis CNC milling centers pinged the local hardware token for a valid, cryptographically signed digital license certificate. Without a valid certificate signed by Mercer IP Technologies, the compiled C++ post-processor refused to translate abstract CAD geometries into real-time microstep toolpaths. At 12:01 a.m. on Monday morning, as the digital certificate expired, the hardware token quietly purged its decryption keys. The 110,000 lines of proprietary code were still sitting on the server hard drives, but they were now encrypted behind AES 256-bit hardware security. Without my private digital key, the raw code was completely indecipherable, reverting to useless strings of gibberish. On Monday morning, I woke up at 6 a.m., made a pot of fresh black coffee, and walked out to my front porch in jeans and a flannel shirt. For the first time in 22 years, I was not standing on a concrete factory floor monitoring machine spindle frequency. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, at Thornton Precision Manufacturing, the morning shift of 150 floor technicians, setup operators, and quality assurance inspectors flooded through the turnstiles at 6:30 a.m. At 7 a.m. sharp, shift supervisor Mark Jennings stepped up to the primary control console of Cell 1, a $4 million DMG Morai 5-axis robotic milling center tasked with machining high-pressure titanium valve bodies for our $45 million defense contract. Mark loaded a raw $50,000 titanium forging block into the hydraulic clamp, closed the heavy armor glass bay door, and pressed the illuminated green cycle start button. Instead of the smooth, familiar hum of high-pressure coolant pumps and spinning spindles, a harsh, continuous alarm siren echoed across the 120,000-square-foot factory floor. The primary touchscreens on all 18 robotic milling cells instantly turned from crisp blue to solid amber, flashing a single, high-contrast system message in bold red text. Error code lick 3527. Master toolpath encryption certificate revoked. Proprietary kinematic engine unlicensed. Hardware Tiki Maj locked. Mark tried to clear the alarm. He cycled the main circuit breakers, rebooted the central machine control server, and attempted to bypass the system prompt. Nothing worked. The machine refused to move a single millimeter along any of their 5 axes. Panic spread across the floor like wildfire. Within 30 minutes, 18 automated machining centers were locked down, bringing the entire manufacturing facility to a dead halt. By 7:45 a.m., Lance Thornton stormed onto the factory floor in a rage, accompanied by his newly appointed IT manager, Steve. A young technician Lance had recently promoted to replace our veteran systems architect. What is the meaning of this? Lance bellowed, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel rafters as operators stood around with their arms crossed. Steve, clear that warning message immediately. We have a defense shipment scheduled for 5 o'clock today. Steve opened a terminal console on his laptop, sweating profusely under the bright industrial lights. Mr. Thornton, the local machine server is rejecting all execution commands. The core toolpath interpolation engine is locked inside an encrypted hardware security container. The certificate expired at midnight. Bypass it, Lance yelled, his face turning red above his white starched collar. Harlan bragged about his code, but we backed up every file on Friday. Upload the raw G-code files we pulled from his cloud directory directly into the machine memory. Carl Vance, who was standing nearby, stepped forward and grabbed Steve's arm before he could touch the control panel. Don't do it, Steve. You don't understand how Harlan's system works. Get out of the way, Carl, Lance barked, shoving his way between them. I run this company. Steve bypassed the hardware token and forced Machine 1 to execute the raw file. Steve hastily typed a script override command, bypassing the hardware security module checks and forcing Machine 1's CNC controller to read a raw, uncompiled G-code file from Lance's uncalibrated backup directory. Steve hit cycle start. The multi-ton 5-axis spindle roared to life, spinning up to 18,000 RPM. But without Harlan's dynamic thermal compensation algorithms making real-time micro-adjustments for tool deflection and material density, the robotic head dove violently into the titanium forging block. At maximum velocity, a sound like an artillery shell exploding rocked Cell 1. The custom $4,000 tungsten carbide end mill shattered into high-velocity shrapnel against the hardened titanium. High-frequency vibration shattered the spindle's ceramic bearings, sending smoke pouring out of the enclosure as the $50,000 titanium forging block warped and ruptured under catastrophic friction. The automated emergency system fired its fire suppression chemical foam, soaking the interior of the $4 million machine cell. Silence fell over the factory floor. Carl Vance walked over to the main power breaker, slammed the physical lockout lever down, and snapped a padlock over it. He turned to Lance, whose face had gone completely white as smoke drifted out of the ruined machine enclosure. That single mistake just cost you a $50,000 raw forging, a $4,000 cutter, and $80,000 in spindle head damage, Carl said in a low, furious tone. If you try to force raw code through the rest of those 17 machines, you will destroy this entire $18 million plant by lunch. By 10 a.m. on Monday, absolute panic had gripped the executive offices of Thornton Precision Manufacturing. The catastrophic destruction of Cell 1 had sent shockwaves through the facility. The floor technicians refused to touch the remaining 17 milling machines, knowing that forcing uncalibrated code through the multi-million-dollar spindles would cause catastrophic mechanical failures. The entire 120,000 square foot plant was completely silent, save for the hum of ambient ventilation fans. In his corner office, Lance Thornton was staring at his smartphone in terror. The screen displayed 42 missed calls and 19 unread emails. The most urgent calls were from Roger Lawson, the lead procurement director for our primary defense contractor. Under the terms of our $45 million defense supply agreement, Thornton Precision was obligated to deliver a batch of 40 high-precision titanium valve bodies by 5 p.m. that afternoon. Section 8C of the master contract stipulated a strict liquidated damages penalty of $250,000 for every calendar day delivery was delayed, with an automatic default termination clause. If production was halted for more than 72 hours, to make matters worse, Lance's smartphone buzzed with a call from his father, Walter Thornton, followed by an urgent summons from the chairman of the board of directors. The board had received the certified notice of license revocation sent by Mercer IP Technologies on Saturday afternoon. But Lance had ignored it. Assuming it was empty legal bravado, desperate to find a quick fix, Lance frantically dialed 3 of the country's top third-party industrial automation and CNC programming consulting firms. He offered to pay double their standard emergency rates if they could send engineers immediately to override the lock and reprogram the 5-axis toolpaths. The senior software consultant from the first firm logged into Thornton's server remotely to inspect the system architecture. After 15 minutes of scanning the code structure, the consultant called Lance back. "Mr. Thornton, you don't seem to understand what you have here," the consultant said bluntly. "This isn't a standard off-the-shelf G-code configuration. This is a highly specialized, custom-compiled 110,000-line real-time kinematic interpolation engine. Whoever wrote this algorithms mastered multi-axis thermal expansion compensation that isn't available anywhere on the commercial market. To reverse engineer and rewrite this proprietary engine from scratch would require a team of 10 senior industrial software architects at least 6 to 8 months, and it would cost you upwards of $2 million. When Lance hung up the phone, his hands were trembling uncontrollably. At 11:30 a.m., as I was sitting on my front porch reading a woodworking journal, my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Lance Thornton's direct corporate line. I let it ring 4 times before calmly answering. "Harlan Mercer," I said. "Harlan, you criminal!" Lance shrieked into the receiver, his voice cracking with unhinged rage. "You sabotaged our servers. You locked down our manufacturing lines. That is illegal industrial extortion. I'm calling the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and our corporate legal team is filing an emergency injunction in federal court to seize your computers and sue you for $20 million in operational damages." I took a slow sip of my iced tea and spoke in a steady, unhurried tone. "Lance, I suggest you take a deep breath and call your external corporate IP counsel before you make any more foolish statements." "Don't give me that garbage," he screamed. "I didn't sabotage anything, Lance," I continued calmly. "I simply enforced Section 12B of the Master Technology Licensing Agreement, a contract signed by your founder 14 years ago and registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Your company was served formal legal notice at 4:01 p.m. on Saturday. You made a deliberate business decision to withhold my contractually earned $110,000 performance bonus. When the 24-hour cure window expired without payment, your commercial operating license automatically self-terminated." I paused, allowing the silence to settle over the line. "Furthermore, under Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 271, any attempt by Thornton Precision Manufacturing to execute, modify, or force my proprietary software through your machines without a valid license constitutes willful, intentional patent infringement. If you run one more line of my code, my IP attorneys will file an immediate ex parte federal injunction, freezing all corporate bank accounts and seizing every finished component in your warehouse." Silence fell over the line. For the first time, the reality of his predicament pierced through Lance's impenetrable wall of arrogance. He realized he was not dealing with a vulnerable employee he could bully with corporate HR tactics. He was dealing with an independent patent holder holding the ultimate kill switch over his entire $18 million manufacturing asset. "Harlan, please," Lance stammered, his tone abruptly shifting from furious aggression to desperate pleading. "We can work this out. I'll wire you the $110,000 right now. Just send us the encryption key so we can get Machine 1 back online before the defense auditors arrive." "It's too late for a simple wire transfer, Lance," I replied coolly. "Section 12B explicitly states that upon default and license termination, the original commercial agreement is null and void. Any reinstatement requires a completely new licensing contract negotiated directly with Mercer IP Technologies. Have a good afternoon." I hung up the phone. At 2 p.m., an emergency meeting of the Thornton Precision Board of Directors was convened in the main conference room. Retired founder Walter Thornton stormed into the building, furious after receiving a direct call from Defense Director Roger Lawson threatening to cancel the $45 million master contract. When Walter learned that Lance had fired me to save $110,000, and in doing so had triggered a total plant shutdown and destroyed a $4 million machine cell, Walter's fury was uncontainable. In front of the entire board, Walter stripped his son of all executive operational authority, revoking his corporate signing powers on the spot. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Walter Thornton. "Harlan," Walter said, his voice thick with shame and exhaustion. "I am calling you on speakerphone with the entire board of directors. I am deeply, profoundly sorry for how my son treated you. He acted with disgraceful arrogance and complete ignorance of what you built for this company. We need you back, Harlan. Name your terms to restore the plant." I listened to Walter's apology with quiet respect. Walter had been a good partner for over 15 years, but business is governed by binding contracts, not emotional sentiment. Lance's reckless greed had permanently altered the dynamics of our relationship, and I had no intention of returning as a salaried employee only to face another corporate trap down the road. "I appreciate your call, Walter," I said into the phone, "and I respect the years we spent building Thornton Precision together. But I will not be returning to my former desk as chief tooling engineer, nor will I simply renew the old licensing agreement." A tense silence filled the boardroom on the other end of the line. "What are your conditions, Harlan?" Walter asked quietly. "The defense contractor is levying $250,000 a day in breach penalties starting at 5 o'clock. We will agree to whatever is fair." I opened my legal notebook and read the 4 non-negotiable terms my attorney and I had drawn up over the weekend. "First," I stated, "Thornton Precision Manufacturing will immediately disburse my accrued $110,000 performance bonus, along with $25,000 in legal reimbursement fees incurred by Mercer IP Technologies." "Agreed," Walter said instantly. "What's the second condition?" "Second," I continued, "I will not enter into another revocable licensing contract. Mercer IP Technologies will execute a complete, perpetual transfer of the full 5-axis patent portfolio and toolpath engine to Thornton Manufacturing for a one-time cash buyout of $3,800,000. The board members gasped in the background, but Walter held up his hand to silence them. $3.8 million was a substantial sum, but it was less than 10% of the $45 million defense contract that was currently hanging in the balance, and far less than the tens of millions in total enterprise valuation the plant would lose if it remained shut down for a week. "Agreed," Walter declared without hesitation. "And the remaining terms?" "Third," I said firmly, "Lance Thornton must be permanently stripped of all corporate executive authority across all subsidiaries of Thornton Precision Manufacturing. He will have zero input in operational, engineering, or personnel management. Furthermore, veteran shop manager Carl Vance must be promoted immediately to Executive Vice President of Operations, with full authority over plant management and a substantial salary increase." "Done," Walter answered without a second's delay. "Lance is already out of the building. Carl Vance will take over plant management effective immediately." "Fourth and finally," I concluded, "all funds, totaling $3,935,000, must be fully cleared and confirmed in Mercer IP's corporate escrow account via Fed wire before I release the digital master certificate." Within 45 minutes, Thornton Manufacturing's corporate legal team and external bank executed the paperwork. At 4:15 p.m., my laptop pinged with a notification from my bank. The wire transfer of $3,935,000 had cleared in full. I logged into the Mercer IP administrative portal, selected the central server token for Thornton Precision, and transmitted the master cryptographic certificate via secure fiber optic uplink. At 4:25 p.m., inside the quiet factory floor, the touchscreens on all 17 operational milling cells instantly shifted from flashing amber to solid blue, the digital displays refreshed with crisp white text, Licensative. AES 256 Master Keys Certificate, Proprietary Kinematic Engine and Night Late. Carl Vance stepped up to the main console of Cell 2, loaded a raw titanium forging, and hit cycle start. The 5-axis spindle spun up to 18,000 RPM with a smooth, perfectly tuned resonance. The high-pressure coolant jets sprayed over the tool tip as the machine cut into the metal with micro-inch accuracy, holding .0002-inch tolerances perfectly. Cheers erupted from the shop floor technicians. The plant was back online. By utilizing pre-inspected inventory buffers, Carl managed to load the defense transport truck by 4:55 p.m., narrowly avoiding the $250,000 daily breach penalty and saving the $45 million master contract. The aftermath was swift and absolute. Lance Thornton's corporate career was completely destroyed. The board of directors stripped him of his executive vice presidency, revoked his corporate sports car lease, and banished him to an entry-level inventory auditing position at a remote metal scrap warehouse in another state. His arrogance had cost the firm nearly $4 million in cash buyouts and damaged machine assets, a blunder that made him a laughingstock in industrial manufacturing circles. Carl Vance took over as executive vice president of operations, restoring morale and bringing veteran engineering respect back to Thornton Precision. Under his leadership, the plant ran smoothly, profitably, and safely. As for me, I officially retired from industrial engineering at 52 years old. With $3.9 million sitting securely in my bank account, I purchased a beautiful 40-acre timber property in the mountains of Oregon. I built a state-of-the-art personal woodworking workshop, where I built custom hand-carved mahogany furniture at my own relaxed pace, sometimes while sitting on my back porch, listening to the wind through the Douglas firs. I think back to that Friday afternoon when an arrogant corporate heir thought he could steal my $110,000 bonus and bully an old engineer. He learned the hard way that in the modern industrial world, fancy suits and MBA buzzwords are no match for ironclad contract law, proprietary patents, and an engineer who knows exactly how to build a kill switch.